Round the bend. The fall in car sales has nothing to do with leaving the EU. Image, Getty, once again, claimed Lib Dem Brexit spokesman Tom Brake. Experts for the British car industry are warning about the damage Brexit poses to jobs and the wider supply chain. With a 20% fall in sales last month, the Tory Brexit mess is punishing the car industry. It is true that Nissan said on Thursday that it was worried about a no-deal Brexit, which could lead to tariffs being imposed on car exports to the EU, although, contrary to how some people have chosen to spin Nissan's statement, it made no threat to close its Sunderland factory or even go back on the expansion of the plant to which it committed itself 2 years ago. Yet Nissan's worries have absolutely nothing to do with the plunge in car sales in September. On the contrary, as the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders (SMMT) made clear when it released the figures, last month's fall was thanks to the bungled introduction of new EU emissions tests, which have left the industry struggling to produce enough vehicles that meet the regulations. The new tests have affected car sales all over the EU. Indeed, in Germany, sales plunged by even more than they did in Britain, by 30.5% compared with September 2017. Funny enough, the Lib Dems press release didn't have enough space to mention that. New tests have affected car sales all over the EU. Image, Getty. The EU's regulation of vehicle emissions is hardly a great advert for that organization. On the contrary, it adds further fuel to the argument that the EU's legislative procedures are fatally flawed. It was thanks to the EU that we have ended up with our cities choked with filthy diesel fumes. Looking for a way of reducing carbon emissions at the turn of the century, the EU decided to encourage a big switch from petrol cars to diesel ones, the rationale being that mile for mile, diesels emit less carbon dioxide. What the EU's then Transport Commissioner Neil Kinnock and his colleagues didn't know was that diesel engines also emit far more soot particles and nitrogen oxides, the latter of which have been implicated in 38,000 deaths a year around the world. Belatedly, the EU came to realize that the emissions tests that European car manufacturers are obliged to meet grossly underestimate the amount of pollutants spewed out in real-world road conditions, as opposed to in emissions tests. Worse, the EU failed even to notice that one manufacturer, Volkswagen, was cheating by programming its engines to behave differently during tests than when driven on the road. It was the US authorities that eventually pulled over Volkswagen, and the company admitted what it was doing. As a result, the EU has designed more rigorous emissions tests, but with little time to prepare for the change, car manufacturers have found themselves unable to produce enough cars to meet demand. As SMMT Chief Executive Mike Haas explained on Thursday, with the industry given barely a year to reapprove the entire European model lineup, it is no surprise that we have seen bottlenecks and a squeeze on supply. At the same time, demand for cars dropped in September because buyers who would normally have waited until September in order to purchase a car with the new 68 registration were tempted by a mass of offers available in August. Manufacturers were forced to discount vehicles in order to shift, before a deadline of September 1, stock that did not meet the new standards. That led to a spike in sales in August, which in Britain were up 23% compared with August 2017. Again, there was no room in the Lib Dems press release to mention that the rearguard Remain lobby will stop at nothing to try to thwart Britain's departure from the EU. It likes to try to claim that it has fact on its side, forever accusing the Leave campaign of lies and deceit, yet it endlessly spews out its own untruths. Yesterday came another example of how news gets spun to suit the needs of the Remain lobby. Unilever announced that it was to reverse its decision to move its stock market listing exclusively to the Netherlands. No one mentioned Brexit at all, other than to say that the company had said the move was nothing to do with Brexit. Yet when Unilever originally announced its decision back in March, there were people jumping up and down insistent that it was all the fault of Brexit. Similarly, we have been told endlessly that the City of London will lose thousands of jobs because of Brexit. Former CEO of the London Stock Exchange Xavier Rolet claimed in January 2017 that 234,000 jobs could move to other EU countries. Yet while a few banks have announced they are to move some staff, clamour for office space in the city has never been higher, and employment in the UK financial sector as a whole has risen substantially since the referendum. To blame Brexit for every set of negative economic news, while ignoring the good news, is pure propaganda. The economy is growing, unemployment is at its lowest in 40 years, and there is no reason to fear we will not keep doing well when we leave the EU next March.